Good evening and welcome. I'm Andrea Mulrine, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the Lackawanna County Bar Association, I'd like to welcome you here this evening for a panel discussion pertaining to the ballot question that will be on our November ballot this year. So, to start off, let's just tell you what the ballot question is, and then we can explain why these esteemed panelists have joined us this evening to discuss it. So the ballot question is, shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to require that justices of the Supreme Court, judges, and magisterial district judges be retired on the last day of the calendar year in which they attain the age of 75 years. And this is a ballot question that is for a proposed constitutional amendment, and it amends the mandatory judicial retirement age. So you will see that on your ballot in November, and the election office will also be providing a rather lengthy plain English statement from the Office of the Attorney General for you to read, but hopefully our esteemed panelists will explain all of this for us this evening, and when you go to vote on Election Day, you'll understand the pros and the cons of all of this. As I said, I do represent the League of Women Voters. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan membership organization, so we neither oppose nor support any candidates for public office. We do take positions, advocacy positions, when an issue has been studied thoroughly on both the pros and the cons. So one of the tenets for this evening was that we needed to talk about both the pros and the cons, and I'll start at the far end with Dr. Jean Wall-Harris, political scientist from the University of Scranton, and Jean is also a representative of the League of Women Voters from here at the University of Scranton, but she will be taking the con position tonight and helping us to understand what the cons are. So let me just share a little bit of information about each one of our panelists. Jean, as I said, is a political science professor here. She joined the university in 1987, and the courses she teaches cover United States local, state, and national governments, public administration, public policies, and political participation. She is co-author of American Democracy Now!, a top-selling American government textbook for undergraduate students, now going into its 5th edition. And she coordinates the University of Scranton's Ready to Run Northeastern Pennsylvania program, training for women interested in politics and possibly running for public office. And I will say that we had a successful Ready to Run here at the university past Saturday. So, Jean, welcome. Thank you for being here with us this evening. Next to Jean, we have Mr. Joe Mittleman. And Mr. Mittleman is the Director of Judicial District Operations for the Administrative Office of Pennsylvania Courts, and has held this position since the department's creation in January of 2000. In this capacity, he is responsible for ensuring the efficient operation of Pennsylvania's minor and trial courts and assisting those courts in carrying out initiatives and directives from the Supreme Court and the Court Administrator of Pennsylvania. In addition, he is responsible for making recommendations to the Supreme Court and Court Administrator regarding administrative complements and salaries for each judicial district. And prior to his employment there, he served as executive administrator for the Superior Court of Pennsylvania. So welcome, thank you for joining us this evening. Next we have Judge Dorado. Judge Vito Dorado has served as an assistant public defender and as chief public defender for Lackawanna County. He has been active in the Lackawanna Bar Association, serving 2 terms on the board of directors and as president of the Bar Association in 1996. He also served as chairman of the Judiciary Committee as well as chairman of the Criminal Rules Committee and the Civil Rules Committee. He currently serves as the chairman of the Lackawanna County Criminal Justice Advisory Board, and since 2007 has served as a member of the Judicial Ethics Committee for the Pennsylvania Conference of State Trial Judges. From 2005 until 2010 and 2012 to the present, Judge Dorado served as the judicial member of the Lackawanna County Prison Board. So thank you for joining us here this evening. Next to Judge Dorado, we have Dr. Mario Carnicchione. Dr. Carnicchione is a specialist in geriatric medicine, is an associate professor and assistant chair of family medicine in the Department of Clinical Sciences at the Commonwealth Medical College. He is also the research director at the Northeastern Pennsylvania Memory and Alzheimer's Center, where he currently is the principal investigator in clinical trials studying new disease-modifying agents for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Dr. Carnicchione is a national speaker on a wide wide range of topics on geriatric medicine, dementia, aging, and long-term care. He is a co-author and reviewer of a number of national clinical practice guidelines in long-term care and on the editorial board of the Journal of Parkinson and Alzheimer's Disease. Dr. Kunikian, thank you for joining us this evening. And last but certainly not least is someone that's been on the stage with me in the League of Women Voters many times before, Senator John Blake, Senator serving the 22nd Senatorial District, which covers Lackawanna County and parts of Luzerne and Monroe counties. He has served the residents of this district in Lackawanna, Luzerne, and Monroe County since 2011, currently serves as the Democratic Vice Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee and as Democratic Chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He also serves as a member of several Senate standing committees, including Community Economic and Recreational Development, Environmental Resources and Energy, Local Government, and Urban Affairs and Housing. And he's also a founding member of the recently formed Pennsylvania Military Community Enhancement Commission, which is tasked with examining and advocating on behalf of Pennsylvania's military installations and the important missions they conduct, which support our war fighters, our state's economy, and our national security. So welcome. So thank you all panelists for being here tonight. And we're going to start with Dr. Harris. So Jean, one of the things that you and I have talked about was that this is a little bit confusing because the question was actually on the ballot in Pennsylvania, at least in Lackawanna County, because we had paper ballots in the spring. So can you bring us up to date on what happened with the votes that we cast then and why we're where we are today? Sure, and certainly if I misrepresent anything, I'm assuming someone will correct me. But the resolution that's on the ballot, the proposed constitutional amendment, started as a House resolution, and both the House and the Senate had resolutions. In the House, it was to increase the retirement age from 70 to 75. The Senate resolution initially asked to eliminate the retirement age. Out of those resolutions, the one that moved forward was the House resolution. And it went through the typical process of getting approved in two different subsequent General Assemblies. It was then placed on the primary ballot for April this year, and then there seemed to be discussion, debate, controversy over the language used in the ballot. There was also conversations about whether or not it's actually better to place these kinds of ballot questions on the general election ballot because more citizens participate in the general election than the primary election. So the House, there was a non-binding legislative resolution that was put forward that said we're going to invalidate the vote that occurred in April. So there was a vote, many ballots had this on their ballots in April, that we would invalidate that vote, that we would consider changing the language of the ballot measure that was going to be showing up on the ballot, and then add it to the November general election ballot. It was a non-binding resolution, but the Department of State decided to implement that non-binding resolution. And so the April ballots did not count. There was then a change in language, and there were several lawsuits filed challenging the change in language, suggesting the new language was not clear, and the language in ballot measures is supposed to be very clear so voters can understand what the change is. And so we've had a series of lawsuits as well, but at this point in time, as far as I know, the ballot question will be on the ballot November 8th for citizens to either approve or reject. Okay, thank you. And Senator Blake, since you've already voted on this in the Senate, can you expand a little bit on what the vote was and why we're where we are today?
So yes, Dr. Harris has it right in terms of process. As anyone knows, the Pennsylvania Constitution requires legislation to be adopted in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, which means a total of 2 years constitutes a legislative session. Once that happens, the Auditor General, the Department of State, the Secretary of State is required to establish some language for the amendment suggested by the resolutions adopted. The Attorney General has to review it to guarantee, as Dr. Harris mentioned, understandable language, and then it goes on the ballot for consideration of the voters. There's overwhelming bipartisan support for the measure. In fact, I was just reviewing at least on the House side, the folks who had co-sponsored the original resolution to allow for the change in the age of retirement for judges, sitting judges in Pennsylvania. there were 11 Republican sponsors, there were 10 Democratic co-sponsors. So it's a very bipartisan thing insofar as it affects judges in all of our jurisdictions. It affects about 20 judges of perhaps, I think, close to 1,200 statewide that may have turned 70 in 2016. It affects our own court here, Court of Common Pleas, Judge Munley, and I believe Judge Giroux, but I'm not certain.
Next year.
Next year, okay. Won't be too long. But the point is that it does have local effect. But there was very, very bipartisan support for the measure initially. I think that's important. But Dr. Harris was correct about the litigation that followed. And the litigation that followed was really driven not so much by the content of the language for the adoption of the ballot question, but the process legislatively that involved the change from the spring to the fall. The concurrent resolution that was subsequently adopted in both houses was advanced primarily by the Republican leadership in both caucuses, in both houses, and it was meant, I believe, to deal with the affirmative nature of the language versus the silent language about what the current retirement age, or the language about what the current retirement age and what it would be. Instead of just an affirmative communication, it's do you, as the voters of Pennsylvania, think it ought to be 75 years of age in that calendar year that judges can continue to serve. And
Senator
so,
Blake, could you just pull that microphone a little bit closer?
I knew you would yell at me once.
Sorry, thank you.
So the point I'm trying to make is that I don't believe that there was legislative opposition to the language or the ballot question and the intention of the ballot question. I think that there was an objection to the parliamentary procedure undertaken by the majority to discount the May vote or the primary vote and to move it to the fall. And the core of that objection in terms of the litigation was this. In the Pennsylvania Constitution, there is pretty affirmative language that says any concurrent resolution adopted by both houses of the General Assembly must be directed to the governor. The concurrent resolution that interrupted the process associated with the primary ballot question on this issue of judge retirement age was not directed to the governor. It was directed by virtue of the language of the resolution itself to the Department of State, to the Secretary of the Department of State. And we felt that that set a precedent that perhaps we ought not be agreeable to. So my leader, Dalen Leach, Senator Tartaglione, did object to that as something that undermined the parliamentary procedure, leading to the kind of let's ignore the vote that occurred in the primary and let's move it to the fall and get the right language. The Republican litigation, on the other hand, was a question about the language itself and whether or not voters could understand it. And it was a legitimate question. And the judges who have ruled on these cases have ruled in favor of that in fact the language ought to be changed and that the ballot question should be determined in the fall and that the ballot question that occurred, where the ballots included it in the primary be discounted, ignored, if you will. There's not, you can't do something like this that doesn't have political overtones. So let me be very candid about the motivation for this, if I can. And I'll let the doctors and the experts explain why, you know, there's reasonable good judgment that says that age of judges is not, you know, an indicator of their capability. The fact of the matter is we already have a senior judge process that allows judges to serve until they're 78, and there's been no diminishment in terms of the quality of the judgment they render or the service that they render on our courts. And I think that when we originally set an arbitrary retirement date, it was set at a time when life expectancy is not what it is today. And so that's a fair consideration. Even Alexander Hamilton, in the early part of our republic, you know, he had basically proposed judicial appointments for life. So the intention was to have growing wisdom across the years that would be a good thing for judges. But I do want to let you know a couple of important political considerations because they can't be ignored. A yes vote to allow the retirement age to go to 75, if the question passed by the voters of Pennsylvania, only one opening on the Supreme Court, Judge Eakin, would be affected by it, and Judge Saylor would be guaranteed to remain Chief Justice of the court for 5 more years. So that's an important consideration, at least from the Republican perspective, and even from ours, from the Democratic perspective, because last year, as we all know, for the first time since King George III was appointing judges in Pennsylvania, 3 openings were filled with Democratic judges. If a no vote occurs and the amendment to the Constitution is rejected to a change in the mandatory retirement age at 70 for Supreme Court justices and other judges and justices of the peace, if the question fails, at least 3 openings on the Supreme Court will be affected between now and 2020. Justice Eakin, Justice Saylor, Justice Baer. I say this to you because there is a political interpretation of what does that mean, when we have openings on the Supreme Court, and what does it mean when we face, the prospect of redistricting in 2021 after the 2020 census. These are political considerations that inform people's opinions about this. The last thing I would have to say, and I hesitate to say this because it's a little bit uncomfortable for me, but I think that the bipartisan support for moving forward the ballot question was the unsavory things that were happening with regard to the judicial system in Pennsylvania, and the interest in creating some distance between that and the actual vote. I think it would go, it would be inappropriate for me not to take into consideration that was obviously informing members of the legislature on this. I supported the question when it came before me twice in the Senate. I think, again, that there's no reason to believe that we shouldn't extend this. There are really wonderful jurists that ought to have the opportunity to continue to serve. And by the way, they've communicated to me that they really want to continue to serve. So that, and I think a lot of my colleagues got that same feedback from justices in their jurisdictions. And so that's the issue of the ballot question, and I think maybe some of the sensibility of the members of the General Assembly on it.
Thank you. So, Dr. Kernikion, then, before we dig into the politics behind all of this, and if you could make sure you pull that microphone right up close, okay, so I don't have to yell at you. Okay. So before we dig into politics, let's talk about the physical, the mental, whatever. So Senator Blake said age is not an indicator of ability. Can you address that at all?
Yeah, I mean, if I take the other variables in the equation the senator was talking about, and I just look at age, as a geriatrician, I can tell you, in the research shows that as far as cognitive processes, age is not the issue, unless you're talking about Alzheimer's disease, where it is the major risk factor for age is the major risk factor. So the older you get, the more likely you are to get the disease. So I mean, I assume from a cognitive standpoint, that's what we're talking about: decision-making capacity. And so, just to put this in perspective, there are places in the world that have high populations of centenarians that have no evidence of Alzheimer's disease. So I would assume that there could be plenty of our judges and the other people that we're talking about that could be 80 or 85 and not have that. I think the medical comorbidities that come with aging are not necessarily as big a factor as cognition, right? So to me, it would seem that age is not something that should be the defining factor. I mean, I would have no issue with 75 because it's always going to be a matter of how's cognitive the cognitive capacity in an individual, So I just I wouldn't see a problem with increasing the age,
Okay, thank you. Judge Girallo, so this is something that will impact you personally next year. Can you speak to your reasons for supporting or not supporting the measure? And again, if you would pull the microphone up really close.
Well, I'm glad that it's been pointed out that I am directly affected by it, so I think full disclosure is absolutely required here. And I have to point out that ethically I can state my own opinion as a judge for reasons for or against the amendment, but I cannot in any way advocate that anyone else do anything about it. That is, I am not encouraging anyone to take a political stand one way or the other.
Right.
But I think that there are strong arguments to be made from the viewpoint of retaining judges along the lines of, first of all, experience. And I don't mean just legal experience, that's obvious. If you have a judge who is on the bench and serving, in my case, I'm in my 14th year, it took me a couple of years to really gain my footing and to feel confident and knowledgeable about what I was doing. After 14 years, I think I approached the job with more confidence, more certitude in what I can do. But in addition to the legal experience, I think there's something to be said for the life experience. And I came to the bench when I was age 53, and I saw life one way then. I saw issues much different, well, colored much differently and shaded much differently than I see them now as I'm approaching my 70th year. So I think not only the legal experience, but the life experience is something that should be retained.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Mittleman, and again, I'm got to pull that microphone right up. So let's talk about the impact on the courts. So you're seeing it from a pretty broad perspective. So what can you tell us about the impact on the courts both ways, either if it passes or if it doesn't pass?
It shouldn't have an impact either way, because the amendment does not create judgeships. It does not eliminate judgeships. It merely permits sitting judges to stay longer if they so choose. One of the questions is, does it affect the senior judge program? Because we rely statewide considerably on the use of senior judges. Last year, we had more than 9,600 judicial assignments to senior judges around the state. And the question is, if judges retire later and the retirement age of seniors stays at 78, will we have a shortage of senior judges? We don't know. There are now and always will be judges who retire before the mandatory retirement age who are eligible for senior service. So we will still have a complement of senior judges. Right now we have 129 common pleas seniors, 112 senior MDJs around the state, and that has been more than ample to serve our needs. If we had fewer, would it serve our needs? We're not sure. But if it were to come to a point where we were to see in that 5-year period when presumably retirements would slow down because there would be fewer retirements, would we need additional seniors? If we did, then we would have the Supreme Court would then be faced with perhaps either extending the retirement age of senior judges from 78 to an older age, or perhaps permitting seniors to sit more often than they do now. Right now, there is a 10-day per month limit that seniors can sit. So they might, if there was a shortage of seniors, those adjustments could be made. But as far as the judicial complement, both at the common pleas and minor court level, the amendment, one way or the other, should have no impact.
Okay. So, Dr. Harris, Jean, you have agreed to take the con position this evening. And again, the League neither supports nor opposes this. We're just sharing information. So, Jean, can you share your research on this?
So a couple of things. And just in general, one of the questions that I would ask is why the change? What's the problem this is trying to address? Is there a problem, or where did this come from? And so I think that's important if we're going to make a change to the Constitution that will have impacts, and we don't know necessarily impacts depending on human behavior. Why are we doing this? There's also some research that does suggest that older judges slow down the process. So they're not as efficient. Things slow down. In some cases, it was seen as excessive slowdown. So we're not challenging cognitive ability, but just the process. And so is this going to, as judges get older, delay justice? A third point, and then I have some others, but then I'll let people respond, is that the tenure on the bench, if we expand the number of years judges can serve, then the tenure on the bench will possibly be longer than other elected officials. So we're giving judges longer time to serve. They have 10-year terms to start with versus 4-year terms or 2-year terms, and so they've already got a longer time in between elections. And does that then shift the balance of power that we have between our three branches of government, we're supposed to have between our three branches of government, by extending the age limit for which judges can serve? So just three concerns that can be raised in terms of the opposition to increasing the age.
Okay, so panelists, is there a response from anyone to any of the things that Jean said? And if there is, remember the microphone.
I think one of the
Judge, if you could pull that right up so that they can hear you. You can even take it right out of the holder.
I think one of the main reasons is really to retain the trained talent and to not have to be having the system going through a period of time where someone is actually learning on the job. In looking at the talent that you wish to retain, I would just say look at the federal system. There are no age limits in the federal system whatsoever. The judges in the federal system are appointed for life. And currently we have 3 members of the United States Supreme Court that are over 80. Another reason I would say to raise it, and I think it's appropriate when addressing the League of Women Voters, is that it's far more common for women to delay their legal careers or their judicial careers if they are already practicing, because so many will opt to spend the early years of their married life and professional life addressing the needs of their children. So that this might effectively, if you keep it low, it might effectively foreclose the opportunity for women to ascend to the bench because they will have a shorter window.
And just, I mean, the mortality rate for men is 75 years, for women it's 80 years. So indeed, there could be a gendered effect of this because women do tend to live longer and, as you said, start their careers. So that's not supporting the con position, but it's a reality. In terms of the experience, though, by leaving it at 70, you're going to have more newer judges who bring to the bench more contemporary life experiences, newer life experiences, and possibly a more diverse range of judges by not increasing it to 75. So by moving it up to 75, there's less opportunity to make some changes, and society is changing, technology is changing, case law is changing, and so some would argue that you need newer judges, more of them sooner, in order to keep up with the changes in society, so that bringing in new judges with more contemporary life experiences is also a benefit on the bench.
So you really are saying that you can't teach old dogs new tricks?
We didn't say that. Senator.
I think the judge already addressed that, Gene, but I do want to because it cuts both ways. It cuts both ways. The age of 70 could be interpreted to be kind of arbitrary. You know, it's just kind of arbitrary. So you can't serve, you know, the day you turn 71 could conceivably rob good jurists of an opportunity to continue to display their wisdom and their judgment in our judicial proceedings. At the same time, this arbitrary line does create the opportunity for younger justices to enter the system. So it seemed when Dr. Harris mentioned what's the motive for it, I think there was a sense in at least among my colleagues and certainly among my leadership, and a lot of I should make a note that there are several members of the General Assembly who themselves are lawyers by practice and experience and have had their experience in the judicial system prior to becoming legislators and even since. But the point I'm trying to make is that they felt there was a certain arbitrary nature to it, and that perhaps the fact that people are living longer and the gender issue that Dr. Harris mentioned is certainly valid. The sense was, you know, we ought not be foreclosing on the opportunity to deal with the wisdom of an older jurist. I do, if you allow me, I'd like to say one more thing. The issue of language on the page is really paramount for any legislator because it all boils down to the words, right? And this argument that we're having, at least insofar as it relates to a constitutional amendment of the ballot question, boils down to words. So if you'll allow me, Andrea, the language that was in the April amendment read like this: shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to require that justices of the Supreme Court, judges and justices of the peace known as magisterial district judges, be retired on the last day of the calendar year in which they attain the age of 75 years, instead of the current requirement that they be retired on the last day of the calendar year in which they attain the age of 70. That was the original ballot question. The language that the Republicans had argued for And remember what I said earlier, they were essentially objecting to whether or not it was clarity and that the voters could make the judgment. This is what the Republicans argued for. And note the differential. Shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to require that justices, judges, and justices of the peace be retired on the last day of the calendar year in which they attain the age of 75 years? That's it, right? Now, the language of the November ballot is this. Shall the Pennsylvania Constitution be amended to require that justices of the Supreme Court, judges, and magisterial district judges be retired on the last day of the calendar year in which they attain the age of 75 years? The reason I say this is because the argument that we had and the litigation that we had argued over whether there was an affirmative communication simply extending and maybe speaking to the arbitrariness of a line at 70 to 75 without drawing the distinction between what it is now and what it's being suggested to be. And that's an important consideration for the voters. And it will be up to the voters to interpret whether or not that's what they think is correct.
I think that's a good point, because I know from people that I've talked to, it's the way that this reads, it's, oh, there's no retirement age now and you're enforcing a retirement age. It's like, no, we're raising the retirement age. Oh, okay, but you get that if you read the plain English statement, which is, several paragraphs long. How many people are really going to read all of that? But I think that that's an important determinant that people need to understand, that it's not about setting a brand new retirement age for where it doesn't exist at all, but that it's increasing the retirement age. And I don't think that the language in the question that we will all vote on is particularly clear on that, but that's the way that it is.
I think
Judge?
it should be pointed out that when the Constitution was adopted, they may have been contemplating the fact that they didn't want to run the risk of judges getting too old and not being able to be removed. Mm-hmm. But when the Constitution was adopted, we did not yet have in place the Court of Judicial Discipline and the Judicial Conduct Board, which now are effective vehicles to removing judges who are not performing properly, and in fact, that played a role in ending the careers of some members of the judiciary within the last year.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as public knowledge of the fact that it would be raising a retirement age, I can't speak to the rest of the state, but I live in the Philadelphia area, and there has been a fair amount of media coverage in the Philadelphia papers concerning this issue. Given all that else is going on politically, it's very well going to be lost in the shuffle, but there has been significant coverage in the Philadelphia papers concerning this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know there has been some coverage in the local papers here, but I don't think it's extensive coverage. Gene?
The Philadelphia Inquirer yesterday issued an editorial urging voters to vote no.
Oh, interesting.
Well, I have to say, it is tough to get a word in edgewise with all these lawyers here.
I put you up there with all the politicians.
I'm afraid you're going to diagnose me and ship me out.
I was just gonna comment on the processing speed issue, because it is a good point. Everybody with aging loses some speed in processing, but the thing that doesn't necessarily change in aging is what we call executive function. So the ability to have abstract thinking and sequencing and deciphering sequencing and stepwise processes. So that doesn't really change just because of aging. In processing speed, you may have a point about maybe you wouldn't be as efficient, but I would suspect that the quality, without any, disease present, cognitive disorder present, that the quality of that cognitive process, even though it's slower, should be the same unless there's something else going on. So,
Okay, Jean, you had something?
Yeah, just to add to that. So if we end up raising the age and having fewer senior judges, but judges are processing slower, we're going to have a problem. And so certainly senior judges for taxpayers are less expensive. They're paid per diem is my understanding, and they lose some benefits. So they're not as expensive as the full-time judges. So there could be tax implications depending on how this all falls out. I don't know if there's been any analysis of that, but it's something to consider in terms of how that might impact. There have been since 1995, 11 states have had questions about changing retirement age. And the states that do, 32 states have a retirement age, and DC, and for the most part it's 70, 72 or 75, so in that range. Vermont has set its age at 90, so there's always an outlier. But the ballot questions that have been asked are the questions to increase the age since 1995. For the most part, they have not passed. And so, that, you know, change is always a concern to people, and so that's one of the problems with this. So they have not been successful in other places. And there hasn't been, I think, as much talk outside of maybe Philly, conversation and for people to understand the full question, losing the part that we're raising it from 70 to 75. And I do think 70, 75, whatever, is arbitrary. I'd like to have learned more about why we moved from establishing an age to just getting rid of a retirement age and relying on the board, the Judiciary Board of Review and Inquiry, on a case-by-case basis. That is what's done in the federal government where there is no retirement age. So there's a process by which judges, there's a toll line you can call in the Ninth Circuit District at least and suggest that you're concerned about the cognition of a judge, and then they go through a whole process, and people are trained in what to look for, and so, I mean, you know, there's a lot of other options. Again, I'm not making the con argument here, but one of the other con arguments is that it does help if you set an age, and the lower, the better, in terms of removing judges from the bench who maybe are not doing a good job, who are unfit to serve. And so this gives at least a timeline for that removal of judges, making that easier, so you don't have to go through a long process of review.
What about elections? We have to be retained. And it's granted it's a 10-year term that we are elected to, but nevertheless, there comes a time, and it sure comes around faster than most of us expect it will, when you have to face the electorate, and you've got to get more than 51% of the people to say, yes, he should or she should be retained.
And most retention elections are successful. People don't turn out too many judges or anybody in a retention election, and people don't turn out even in a competitive House or Senate election. Re-election rates are 80, 90, 95% for the U.S. Congress. So I agree, in democracy we have elections, and then people can make a decision, but when we look at the percentage of people who actually participate in our elections, which is in judicial elections, I'm sure less than half of the folks in the state are participating in those elections. Elections is not necessarily the best way to get rid of even unfit elected officials.
Perhaps you brought up the issue of it's cheaper and it might be more economical. But Mr. Mittleman, what about the contributions to the retirement system as opposed to senior judges drawing from the retirement system?
Well, first of all, Your Honor, we don't view this as having a fiscal impact at our level because we will still have the same number of judges, whether they can sit to 70 or 75. So we will still be paying the same number of judges. And as far as senior judge usage, then the demand should stay the same, and we'd be paying the same number of senior judges. Now, whether we have a smaller pool to draw from or not doesn't change the fact that the senior judge demand should stay the same, as long as caseloads stay the same. As far as the impact of judges paying into the system rather than drawing from the system, that's true. Judges will continue to pay into the system longer, and presumably be drawing for a shorter time since they will be retiring later. As to the financial impact of that, I'm not sufficiently knowledgeable of the actuarial studies that would say whether that is a positive or negative impact, but you're right, there would be increased time that judges are paying into the system.
Okay. Senator, Jean raised a question about why not just eliminate the retirement age completely. Was that something that was considered in the House or the Senate?
I believe the original concurrent resolution that was taken up in the Senate actually did just want to eliminate the retirement age. It was not agreed to by majority leadership in both chambers, and the default ended up being the House concurrent resolution. But again, there was overwhelming bipartisan support for the measure, for the House resolution on the constitutional amendment. as the chairman of the Finance Committee, I didn't think I would hear the word actuarial table today. but I realized that, no, it's a very good point. It's actually, I'll get back to Harrisburg and look up some pension actuarials. But no, the truth is that the original intention in the Senate, the House, the concurrent resolution was just eliminate the retirement age and then allow perhaps us to reflect, as Dr. Harris ably pointed out, some of the federal procedures that are undertaken to determine fitness, if you will. But I think that the sensibility that we had as legislators was informed by what we heard back home, what we heard from jurists that we respected, and also this sense that, when the Constitution was adopted and these rules were put in place, life expectancy wasn't what it is, and that there was science, reasonable science, that would indicate a capability and an acute understanding and a wisdom that was worth protecting a little longer. Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've covered the pros, we've covered the cons, we've covered the whys, and the physical piece. Is there anything from any of our panelists that we've missed that we should have talked about tonight?
Well, I think one of the points that was brought up was the extent to which the electorate has been educated on this, and I think the prior speaker was right that perhaps in Philly and maybe to some extent in Pittsburgh, I think the profile has been higher. I don't, again, want to go into space where I'm uncomfortable, but I think that is evident of some of the vehemence of the press regarding, some of the issues that were going on in the judiciary, and I think that was white hot, and I think that they connect those things, and that's the way it gets reported, and that's the way some of the editorial and opinions are rendered. But I don't know that that's true everywhere in the state.
Senator, interestingly, the judges who brought disrepute upon the system were not of an age where they should have been retired.
That's correct.
All right, so their age had nothing to do with the problems that are now causing the backlash against it.
I'm just trying to talk about the difficulty of the electorate digesting information and disconnecting things that ought not be connected, and whether or not the same level of reporting is occurring everywhere. The other point that was made earlier is the sheer well, I don't want, the word isn't distraction, but I'm saying that there are so many things going on in the political process right now that this one is kind of, it's not on the front burner, if you will, and yet it has considerable consequences for our jurists throughout the state. So
just look at the huge audience.
Yeah, about it. But anyway, that's something that I think I'll be, we don't have too much more time now, and it'll be interested to see what the editorial boards do, and now that all the judicial cases have been, put aside and the ballot question is going to be there and it's understood what's going to happen, it'll be interested to see what the reporting and the editorial boards have to say to be part of the informative process for the electorate in order for them to make a good decision when they get to the ballot box.
All right. Any final words from anyone?
Just one comment. The typical American retires at the age of 62. So that's an interesting piece of data in terms of looking at this long term. It's nice to know that judges want to serve longer than that. They are public servants, and that's really important. The salary's not so bad either. And so $177,000 for common pleas on average, judges. So maybe that helps to explain why many people retire at 62, and others looking to stay longer.
Okay. Anything else?
Can I just add?
Yes,
that,
absolutely.
It's the best job in the world, okay, for anyone who is serious and conscientious about it. It is an opportunity to do more good than any other job that I know of for someone with a law degree. So I agree, it's an attractive position, but the reason why we don't retire is there is a great sense of fulfillment you get out of your work if you put yourself into it and take the opportunities that are presented to you.
Okay. So with that, if you think you voted on this question in the past, the answer is yes, you have, but your vote didn't count. So you need to vote on it again in November. So there's both political ramifications and then also the consideration of personal health, well-being, personal ethics, how judges are running the courts. Are you happy with all of that? So all of these things to take into consideration. Again, it was our goal this evening to provide you with information, but not to advocate one way or the other. And I have a question from the audience. But I need to repeat it for you for the camera, so. So the question is, do most judges go up to the 70 and retire, or do most of them retire earlier? And I have no idea.
I don't have percentages, but in my experience, most judges retire at age 70, but it's not unusual for a judge to retire before that. But most do go to the retirement age.
Okay. All right, so please join me in thanking our panelists this evening for being with us here. Again, on behalf of the League of Women Voters and the Lackawanna County Bar Association, thank you for being here this evening at the University of Scranton. We have a couple of things. The League has a couple of things coming up. We have a debate with candidates Marty Flynn, Representative Flynn, and his opponent David Bergerhoff. And that's here at the University of Scranton. And at Clark Summit University, Jean will be the moderator there between Sid Michaels-Kavulich and Cheryl Mernon Scandell. I always get that wrong.
Yeah.
Scandell Mernon, okay.
And so the October 20th here at the university, 8:15 is the debate for the 113th Legislative District. And then October 27th at Clark Summit University, 7 o'clock, is the debate for the other district whose number is escaping my brain.
So those will be taped for broadcast on ECTV and also posted on the League of Women Voters website, lwvlackawanna.org. I would also be remiss if I did not tell you that next year is a municipal election year. It is the year when the League of Women Voters holds our campaign school. The League, in conjunction with the University of Scranton, did Ready to Run last weekend, which was focused specifically on women wanting to run for office. And at the end of January, we'll be running campaign school, which is really a half-day seminar for anyone who wants to run for public office. So we invite you to check out the League's website. Information, when it gets a little bit closer to that, will be posted as well. So again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everyone here tonight, and to Mark at ECTV, Leanne at the Lackawanna County Bar Association. Have a good night.